Hey guys, Mrs. Fox here from Social Studies. Hopefully you've got your paper and pens and highlighters ready to go so we can do our flipped classroom for Unit 6.4, Trouble with the Catholic Church. Make sure you're getting that title down and your EQ. We're going to be highlighting just like normal and doing left-hand side questions just like normal. If I'm ever going too quick for you, remember you can always pause until you're ready to go and push play again and keep right on trucking along. All right, if you don't have your title and your EQ down, go ahead and push pause now because here we go. Oh, yeah. All right, so remember, during the Middle Ages, almost all of Western Europe was united under the Catholic Church. Okay, it's not like America where multiple churches are present, multiple religions are present in the United States, and no one religion really has the market on the most people. Okay, it's pretty divided in the United States, and some people don't practice anything at all. Remember, in medieval Europe, almost everybody, like 90% of the population or more, was Roman Catholic in Western Europe during the medieval times. Okay, so keep that in mind. You don't have to write that down, just keep it in mind. Okay, all right, so here's your first question. You're gonna write Q1, changes in power, on the right-hand side of your notes, just like if we were in class. Highlight it yellow. Make sure that as we're going, anything in that super duper very important color on the slides, you are busting out your super duper very important highlighter color and highlighting that stuff. Okay, so question one is shift in power is occurring when the medieval times is winding down and the Renaissance is taking off. Okay, remember we did the Renaissance right before we started Reformation. So Renaissance was a rebirth. Trade has been introduced. Power has been shifting as manor systems are starting to be abandoned and more people are moving into towns. So powers of kings have been escalating as nobles are kind of losing some power and kings are gaining that power. All right, this shift continues during the Renaissance period. Remember that even though we've moved on to focusing on the Reformation, guys, the Reformation takes place during the Renaissance. Okay, so that late 1300s through the beginning of the 1600s is that Renaissance period, and the Reformation takes place in the 14 and into the 1500s. So it's one of the things that's happening in society while the Renaissance is at the same time taking place. So when the Renaissance is going on, that shift of power in Western Europe continues, okay? And monarchs begin to gain more and more power as people have become humanists. They start questioning the authority and the word of the Catholic Church. People have walked away from religion to a point. Don't get me wrong, the Catholic Church is still very powerful and very wealthy, but the height of their power was taking place during the medieval period, and in the Renaissance they're going to slowly see some of their power declining. Well, there's only so much power to go around, and if somebody's losing the power, that means somebody else is gaining the power. Okay, so as the Pope and the Catholic Church start to lose power throughout the Renaissance period, the person picking up that power is the various monarchs throughout Western Europe. Okay, so keep that in mind. Make sure you busted out all the highlighting you needed to do. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. And make sure you put a left-hand side question. You're going to come up with one on your own. You can do it. You're smart. Okay, if you need more time, push pause. Otherwise, here we go. All right, question two, the Great Schism. We've had this word before. You might remember the word schism from when we were talking about the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church deciding ultimately to split. So if you were living in Eastern Europe during the medieval times, you were probably Eastern Orthodox. But remember, this unit, we're not focusing on Eastern Europe, we're focusing on Western Europe. And so we are looking at the Catholic Church. So you remember that word schism from the Rome unit, hopefully. Okay, well, here it comes again. So the Great Schism was a split in the Catholic Church in the 1300s. Here's the skinny. I'll fill you in, okay? All right, so some countries during the medieval period and during the Renaissance period were more powerful than others, obviously. That's true any time period, right? So during the Renaissance period, one of the most powerful countries in Western Europe was France. Okay, so France had used its influence to help get French popes elected one after another. Remember, there's only ever one pope at a time, and they usually keep the job till they die, right? And then they're going to elect another pope. Well, they would use their influence to get votes in their favor so that every pope that was elected was French. Why does that matter? Because if you're from France, you're probably going to favoritize France to at least some extent. And remember how powerful the church was, guys. They helped make laws. They could collect taxes. They were able to torture people for information, right? People would do what they said. So if your pope was consistently one pope after another from France, then lucky you if you're French. But of course, after a while, everybody else was like, what the heck? And they always felt like the French king at the time and the French pope at the time were in cahoots with each other, and everyone else was kind of playing second fiddle, and other countries were getting tired of it. This ended up causing multiple arguments that escalated and escalated over time to the point where the pro-French people and the anti-French people weren't getting along anymore. They were tired of it and they decided to split. Don't think that the only pro-French people were French. There were people from other countries that were cool with popes being French all the time. So now you've got this split that has happened, which is referred to today as the Great Schism. Okay, so for 40 years, there were two popes. All right, the French Pope and whoever the other pope that had been elected was. You can imagine the confusion that this caused, okay? Because if you are a Catholic Church believer, the Pope to you has a special connection and special powers with, connecting to God that other people on the planet don't have. And so now all of a sudden, if Pope A says, hey, this is the law, but Pope B says, no, it's not, who are you supposed to believe? I mean, your soul is at stake. Like literally, if you might end up going to heaven or hell when you die is on the table. Should you listen to the French Pope? Should you listen to the other Pope? Okay, it was causing problems and headaches for the Catholic Church all over. Plus, some people decided to leave because of this. Hey, Catholic Church, you guys can't get your stuff together. You couldn't figure out what was happening during Black Death. You are getting contradicted all the time now that there's printing presses and people are thinking for themselves, and now you can't even figure out who the heck is in charge. Okay, so this was causing some people to leave and get upset with the church. So after 40 years, the Catholic Church is like, hey, this is causing more problems than it's worth. We need to kiss and make up. And so there was a big conference that they held, and ultimately a lot of compromises were made, and we end up going back to the one pope model, and the Catholic Church reunites in 1417, moving forward from that time ever since to today with only one pope. But some damage had been done that they weren't going to be able to very easily repair. Okay, so that is the Great Schism. Make sure that you have everything highlighted. You made yourself a question on the left-hand side. If you need more time, push pause because here we go. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. All right, here's number 3 for us. All right, during the medieval period, the Catholic Church was large and in charge and started off with good intentions. However, as the medieval period progressed and we had so many issues with the Black Death and the violent and unstableness of it all that led to feudalism and the 100 Years' War and all these other things that were going on, corruption, remember those are people doing bad and shady and greedy things on purpose for their own gain, okay? Corruption was starting to seep its way into the Catholic Church. By the time you get to the Renaissance period in the late 1300s, early 1400s, corruption was widespread. Everyone from the Pope down, a lot of the times, there was a lot of corrupt people throughout the years within the Catholic Church. Now, don't get me wrong. We had popes who were amazing and honest and did nothing but their best job that they could and loved God with all their hearts. And we had priests and bishops and cardinals and everybody else that did their job well. Unfortunately, there was several bad apples amongst the good apples, and corruption was spreading more and more amongst clergy members. Sometimes we had corrupt popes, and sometimes we had corrupt clergy or priests or bishops and other people. Okay, so one of the ways that this corruption came out, like how could the average person tell, hey, wait a minute, there's something shady going on, all right? One of the ways that they could tell was the church had huge amounts of land. You guys might remember they owned more land than any one kingdom or any one lord or any one king owned. They owned acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of land. Well, it costs money to maintain that land, buildings on that land, roads on that land, all different types of things you do when you have land. There's maintenance to it. So they need a lot of money to maintain that. And so what they did was tax the Europeans of Western Europe to raise funds to pay for that land. Okay, if that land was being used by Western Europeans and you were a Catholic and you didn't mind helping out, that in itself is not necessarily so bad. But what was shady about it is those taxes kept getting higher and higher and higher. And while all of the average citizens out there were paying to help support the church land, guess what? If you worked for the church, you didn't have to pay any taxes. Wait, what? It's your guys' land. Shouldn't you be helping paying the tax since you own the land? The Catholic Church said, nope, you guys should be taking care of it all on your own. That upset a lot of Europeans. They thought that was shady, and it is kind of shady, right? So that's one way corruption was showing that, hey, man, that tax stuff, that's not cool. Everybody should be doing their fair share. The church shouldn't get out of having to pay taxes. All right, highlight, highlight, highlight. Okay, write yourself a question over on the left-hand side. You can think of a good one. You are smart. You can do it. All right, and push pause if you're not ready, because here we go. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. All right, here we are at number 4. Number 4, another way that corruption was showing, and that unfortunately a lot of shady things were starting to happen in the Catholic Church, was that a lot of the average citizens in Western Europe noticed that they felt like their local level clergy leaders and more higher up clergy leaders often seems to have lost sight of church values. Living a pious life, which means living holy, living not high on the hog, not all rich and mighty, right? If you're a clergy member, you should have a pretty modest size house and modest clothing and modest possessions. You shouldn't be throwing lavish parties and living in a huge mansion on a hill, right? But a lot of clergy members were doing exactly that. Fine clothing, fancy parties, the best and most exotic trade goods, big fancy houses. And hey, wait a minute, shouldn't that money be going to orphanages and helping the poor? Okay. And so a lot of people felt like the church had lost sight of values, that they were really kind of looking out for themselves and their buddies, and they'd lost sight of some of the goals a church should have, helping those in need and that type of thing. And so people started to call for reform, reformation. Okay, so this Reformation movement, if you look at the word Reformation, inside of that word is the word reform, and reform means change. Okay, so people are calling for change. They're not liking the direction the Catholic Church is going, and they're demanding reform or change. Okay, notice that whole thing was highlighted, so bust out that super duper very important highlighter color and get it all highlighted away. Get your question on the left-hand side. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. Okay, some examples of them acting corrupt. We're almost out of time actually on part 1, so I'll tell you the examples in part 2. So make sure you wrap up your part 1 notes and then look for part 2 in our class website and continue on with that same set of notes you're writing. I'll see you guys in part 2.